I am no king, and I am no lord, and I am no soldier at arms. I am none but a harper, and a very poor harper, that am come hither to wed with ye. If you were a lord, you should be my lord, and the same if you were a thief. And if you are a harper, you shall be my harper, for it makes no matter to me, for it makes no matter to me. But what if it prove that I am no harper, that I lied for your love most monstrously? Why, then I'll teach you to play and sing, for I dearly love a good harp, said she. The end. Ah, wasn't that a wholesome read, everybody? Such a terrific parable of mortality, love, regret, the human condition, presented in such a powerful allegory and commentary about gender roles and societal expectations. Truly, this was a masterful read, and I thank you for being part of it. And yeah, what's that? What are you saying to me right now? This wasn't the right book? What? You mean to tell me I've been reading this book for the past 8 hours? For nothing? You didn't record it? What do I even pay you for? Oh, I don't pay you. In fact, you're not even real. I should just get on with the show, you say? Well, isn't that mighty convenient? Ah, jeez. Hello, everyone. Let's read some Orwell.
Lining them up like ladies, ponies. I'm stepping in harder this year. Yeah, man, rapping in. Watch me as I grab it. Watch me as I quick. We gon' ghost town this Motown with your sound. You like the dust, can't fight with us with your sound. You so don't stop, get it until you.
So it has been some time, shall we say, since the last time I bothered to read 1984. In fairness, the last chapter I've come across was a marginal upswing in terms of quality compared to the last few miserable ones that I had to go through. And the reason why it was slightly better is because the book finally bothered to actually give a proper personality and background to the female lead of this novel, which is, again, a really good thing considering that up until this point she's been nothing, and I do mean nothing, but a sexual fantasy for the older male lead. Let us not mince words here. This book went from such skillful, intriguing, if a tad overpanned world building to high school romance level alternative universe fanfiction. That's the best I can describe it. This is one of the most influential science fiction books of the 20th century. The very concept of the dystopian future, the literary genre of the British modern dystopian genre, to be specific. It exists specifically because of this book right here. Terry Gilliam's Brazil wouldn't exist without this book. Some of the cornerstones, the pillars of the cyberpunk cultural movement wouldn't exist if it weren't for 1984. Yes, I am slapping the book like a madman, because I want it to hurt. Oh wait, before that actually, I want to do a bit of a shout out to a webcomic series that I am enjoying quite a bit, and I find it surprisingly relatable, especially considering my literary woes. That series is titled Unbound, and you can find the link for it in the description of this video. It's a really nice, funny comic about two birds running a local library, with all sorts of jokes having to do with obsessive compulsive readers and books in general. Books, so many books. So yes, if you are into your literature and you are not actually reading any of your literature, I cannot recommend enough this webcomic. Now, on to chapter 4 of part 2. Let's see what kind of shenanigans these two rebellious lovebirds will get into. Winston looked round the shabby little room above Mr. Charrington's shop. Oh yes, I remember this. He actually rented this space right at the end of part 1, if I'm not mistaken. Again, it has been a while. I have a much more vivid memory of him getting an old man drunk. More than anything else. Oh, those were good times. Beside the window, the enormous bed was made up, with ragged blankets and a coverless bolster. The old-fashioned clock with the 12-hour face was ticking away on the mantelpiece. In the corner, on the gate leg table, the glass paperweight which he had bought on his last visit gleamed softly out of the darkness. In the fender was a battered tin oil stove, a saucepan, and 2 cups provided by Mr. Charrington. Winston lit the burner and set a pan of water to boil. He had brought an envelope full of Victory coffee and some saccharin tablets. Victory coffee, by the way, it's a brand, hence why both Victory and coffee are in capital letters. The initials, that is. The clock's hands said 7:20. It was 19:20, really. She was coming at 19:30. Oh, let me count the seconds in which I shall be reunited with my significantly younger companion, which happened to be a junior Girl Scout. How creepy was that, really? Folly! Folly! His heart kept saying. Conscious, gratuitous, suicidal folly. Of all the crimes that a party member could commit, this was the least possible to conceal. Well, I'm assuming that all of the moaning and crickety-crankety beds and the sound in general produced by the activity of mating might be easy to spot with your ears, and I just grossed myself out. Actually, the idea had first floated into his head in the form of a vision of the glass paperweight mirrored by the surface of the gate leg table. As he had foreseen, Mr. Charrington, turning the page, made no difficulty about letting the room. He was obviously glad of the new dollars that it would bring him, nor did he seem shocked or become offensively knowing when it was made clear that Winston wanted the room for the purpose of a love affair. Instead, he looked into the middle distance and spoke in generalities, with so delicate an air as to give the impression that he had become partly invisible. Privacy, he said, was a very valuable thing. Everyone wanted a place where they could be alone occasionally, and when they had such a place, it was only common courtesy in anyone else who knew of it to keep his knowledge to himself. He even, seeming almost to fade out of existence as he did so, added that there were 2 entries to the house, one of them through the backyard, which gave on an alley. Under the window somebody was singing. Winston peeped out, secure in the protection of the muslin curtain. The June sun was still high in the sky, and in the sun-filled court below, a monstrous woman, again with George Orwell and his colorful descriptions of women. What is up with that? Every time we get to the slums, every time we get here, there is always some monstrous woman lollygagging about, and the author feels the need to over-explain how monstrous these women are. Jeez Louise. Solid as a Norman pillar, there you go. Now a woman has been officially compared to a Norman pillar. Fantastic. Oh, it continues! With brawny red forearms and a sucking apron strapped about her middle, was stamping to and fro between a washtub and a clothesline. Clothesline from hell! Lariato! Not that kind of clothesline. Pegging out a series of square white things which Winston recognized as baby's diapers. Whenever her mouth was not corked with clothes pegs, she was singing in a powerful contralto. Oh, I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. I work all day, I sleep all night. I wish. Now she's singing, it was only an hopeless fancy, it passed like an April die, but a look and a word and the dreams they steered, they have stolen my heart away. Of course, for accuracy I should have read this in a Cockney accent, but I am not going to do that. You're welcome. The tune had been haunting London for weeks past. The entirety of London, you say? It was one of countless similar songs published for the benefit of the proles by a subsection of the music department. The words of these songs were composed without any human intervention whatever, or an instrument known as a versificator. You mean a Vocaloid? But the woman sang so tunefully as to turn the dreadful rubbish into an almost pleasant sound. He could hear the woman singing, and the scrape of her shoes on the flagstones, and the cries of the children in the street, and somewhere in the far distance a faint roar of traffic. And yet the room seemed curiously silent, thanks to the absence of a telescreen. Folly, folly, folly. 3 times he said it. He thought again, it was inconceivable that they could frequent this place for more than a few weeks without being caught, but the temptation of having a hiding place was truly their own. Indoors and near at hand had been too much for both of them. For some time after their visit to the church belfry, it had been impossible to arrange meetings. Working hours had been drastically increased in anticipation of Hate Week. I still cannot get over that there is a Hate Week, and I still cannot get over that I can't believe it doesn't exist in real life. You'd think it would at this point, but it doesn't. Yet. It was more than a month distant, but the enormous, complex preparations that it entailed were throwing extra work onto everybody. Finally, both of them managed to secure a free afternoon on the same day. They had agreed to go back to the clearing in the wood. On the evening beforehand, they met briefly in the street. As usual, Winston hardly looked at Julia as they drifted towards one another in the crowd. But from the short glance he gave her, it seemed to him that she was paler than usual. Uh-oh, troubles in paradise. It's all off, she murmured as soon as she judged it safe to speak. Tomorrow, I mean. What? Tomorrow afternoon I can't come. Why not? Oh, the usual reason. It started early this time. Oh! 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 Oh, Oh, I see. Okay, Oh, I see. You're talking about that. Oh boy, I cannot wait to see how Orwell handles this. For a moment, he was violently angry. There you go, you old chap, old pal, old chum, Georgie boy. During the month that he had known her, the nature of his desire for her had changed. At the beginning, there had been little true sensuality in it. Their first love-making had been simply an act of the will. I love this. An act of the will. But after the second time, it was different. Oh gosh. The smell of her hair, the taste of her mouth, the feeling of her skin seemed to have got inside him, or into the air all round him. She had become a physical necessity, something that he not only wanted, but felt that he had a right to. Oh, brother. Now this passage right here. Again, it might seem a bit unfair of me to say it, considering the time in which it was written. But, brother, this did not age well. At all. At all! Our very likable protagonist that we are supposed to identify with feels that the woman he likes, he has a right to her physical presence. I don't know about you, but I spot a few problems with this sentence. With this entire passage, and the less I talk about that one time in which he fantasized of raping and killing her, and he told her out loud, the better. When she said that she could not come, he had the feeling that she was cheating him. But just at this moment, the crowd pressed them together, and their hands accidentally met. She gave the tips of his finger a quick squeeze that seemed to invite not desire, but affection. It struck him that when one lived with a woman, this particular disappointment must be a normal, recurring event. And a deep tenderness, such as he had not felt for her before, suddenly took hold of him. He wished that they were a married couple of 10 years standing. He wished that he were walking through the streets with her just as they were doing now, but openly and without fear, talking of trivialities and buying odds and ends for the household. He wished above all they had some place where they could be alone together without feeling the obligation to make love every time they met. All right? Okay, this is a baby step towards the right decision. Towards the right direction, I should say. It was not actually at that moment, but at some time on the following day, that the idea of renting Mr. Charrington's room had occurred to him. When he suggested it to Julia, she had agreed with unexpected readiness. Both of them knew that it was lunacy. It was as though they were intentionally stepping nearer to their graves. As he sat waiting on the edge of the bed, he thought again of the cellars of the Ministry of Love. The Ministry of Love. I cannot take any dystopian futuristic figure of authority seriously if they are literally called the Ministry of Love. It's just, it's too much. It was curious how that predestined horror moved in and out of one's consciousness. There it lay, fixed in future time, preceding death as surely as a 99 precedes 100. One could not avoid it, but one could perhaps postpone it. And yet, instead, every now and then, by a conscious, willful act, one chose to shorten the interval before it happened. At this moment, there was a quick step on the stairs. Julia burst into the room, Kool-Aid Man style. Yeah! She was carrying a tool bag of coarse brown canvas, such as he had sometimes seen her carrying to and fro at the ministry. He started forward to take her in. His arms... Okay. So there seems to be a bit of a smudge or a typo in this printed edition. It looks like there is a period after in, but there isn't, in fact. So hence why I was reading this sentence weirdly. He started forward to take her in her arm. He started forward to take her in his arms, but she disengaged herself rather hurriedly, partly because she was still holding the tool bag. "Half a second," she said. "Just let me show you what I've brought. Did you bring some of the filthy Victory coffee? I thought you would. You can chuck it away again, because we shan't be needing it. Look here." She fell on her knees, threw open the bag, and tumbled out some spanners and a screwdriver that filled the top part of it. Underneath was a number of neat paper packets. The first packet that she passed to Winston had a strange and yet vaguely familiar feeling. It was filled with some kind of heavy, sand-like stuff which yielded wherever you touched it. "It isn't sugar?" he said. "Real sugar, not saccharine. Sugar, and here's a loaf of bread, proper white bread, not our bloody stuff, and a little pot of jam, and here's a tin of milk! Milk, you guys! But look, this is the one I'm really proud of. I had to wrap a bit of sacking round it because..." But she did not need to tell him why she had wrapped it up. The smell was already filling the room, a rich hot smell which seemed like an emanation from his early childhood, but which one did occasionally meet even now, blowing down a passageway before a door slammed, or diffusing itself mysteriously in a crowded street. Sniffed for an instant and then lost again. "It's coffee," he murmured. "Real coffee." "It's inner party coffee. There's a whole kilo here," she said. "How did you manage to get a hold of all these things?" "It's all inner party stuff. There's nothing those swine don't have. Nothing. But of course, waiters and servants and people pinch things. And look, I got a little packet of tea as well." Winston had squatted down beside her. He tore open a corner of the packet. Oh, phew! It's a packet that he tore open. Oh, thank goodness. I was worried there for a second. "It's real tea, not blackberry leaves. There's been a lot of tea about lately. They've captured India or something," she said vaguely. "But listen, dear. I want you to turn your back on me for 3 minutes. Go and sit on the other side of the bed. Don't go too near the window, and don't turn round till I tell you." Winston gazed abstractedly through the muslin curtain. Down in the yard, the red-armed woman was still marching to and fro between the washtub and the line. She took 2 more pegs out of her mouth and sang with deep feeling. "They say the time heals all things, they say you can always forget, but the smiles and the tears across the years, they twist my heartstrings yet. She knew the whole drivelling song by heart, it seemed. Her voice floated upward with the sweet summer air, very tuneful, charged with a sort of happy melancholy. One had the feeling that she would have been perfectly content if the June evening had been endless and the supply of clothes inexhaustible, to remain there for 1,000 years, pegging out diapers and singing rubbish. That's the life. It struck him as a curious fact that he had never heard a member of the party singing along and spontaneously. It would even have seemed slightly unorthodox, a dangerous eccentricity, like talking to oneself. Perhaps it was only when people were somewhere near the starvation level that they had anything to sing about. "You can turn round now," said Julia. He turned round, and for a second almost failed to recognize her. "Oh, I cannot wait to hear about this." Let me just make myself more comfortable. Let's the chair and the pillow. That's how we go to have the lubrication material, of course. Cannot go without that. Okay. What he had actually expected was to see her naked. Well, that makes the two of us, brother. But she was not naked. The transformation that had happened was much more surprising than that. She had painted her face. Oh boy, this is some very interesting kinky play, I have to say. I cannot wait to see where this is going. She must have slipped into some shop in the proletarian quarters and bought herself a complete set of makeup materials. Her lips were deeply reddened, her cheeks rouged, her nose powdered. There was even a touch of something under the eyes to make them brighter. It was not very skillfully done, but Winston's standards in such matters were not high. He had never before seen or imagined a woman of the party with cosmetics on her face. The improvement in her appearance was startling. With just a few dabs of color in the right places, she had become not only very much prettier, but, above all, much more feminine. Her short hair and bowish overalls merely added to the effect. She is a walking burlesque act, I get it. As he took her in his arms, a wave of synthetic violets flooded his nostrils. He remembered the half-darkness of a basement kitchen, and a woman's cavernous mouth. It was the very same scent that she had used. But at the moment, it did not seem to matter. "Send two," he said. "Yes, dear, send two. And do you know what I'm going to do next? I'm going to get a hold of a real woman's frock from somewhere and wear it instead of these bloody trousers. I'll wear silk stockings and high-heeled shoes. In this room I'm going to be a woman, not a party comrade, because as we all know, women are defined by makeup and clothing and acting feminine, because there are no other categories of women in existence in the age in which George Orwell was alive. Sadly, that's true, but still. Perhaps people need to have a bit more of a critical mindset when going back and rediscovering these old works in general, because yes, I recognize how important they were for their times and how important and pioneeristic in a lot of elements these books were. And to this very day, they still influence a lot of what we perceive as modern science fiction, in the worst possible manners, I would add. But still, that does not mean they should be immune to criticism. In fact, reading these passages, well, this and many other passages in this frankly incredibly frustrating book, it reveals a disturbing and oppressive mindset of its own, which again, it's not the dystopian future depicted in this book, it's the way in which it's... How do I put this? It's the way in which society, a patriarchal society, mind you, has always perceived women. And this book very implicitly and sometimes very explicitly tells you this is what a real woman should be like. Not working class, like all the women who actually were working class during the Second World War. No, real women should be in a very specific way that would appeal to the male gender. And no, before you say anything, I am not reading too deep into this. First of all, why would I not be reading too deep into this? This is a George Orwell novel, not some schlocky young adult nonsense. This is one of the most important science fiction writers of the 20th century. If I am not allowed to deep dive in a book like this and deconstruct it, then when am I supposed to do it? Where am I supposed to do it? But furthermore, I am not reading too deep into this because it's plainly in the text to see in almost every passage that bothers to describe what this woman is in relation to what the man wants. So there. I am not letting this go. Let's see. They flung their clothes off and climbed into the huge mahogany bed. It was the first time that he had stripped himself naked in her presence. Until now he had been too much ashamed of his pale and meagre body, with the varicose veins standing out of his scalps and the discolored patch over his ankle. Ugh, you should see a doctor for that. There were no sheets, but the blanket they lay on was threadbare and smooth, and the size and springiness of the bed astonished both of them. "It's sure to be full of bugs, but who cares?" said Julia. "One never saw a double bed nowadays, except in the homes of the proles. Winston had occasionally slept in one in his boyhood. Julia had never been in one before, so far as she could remember." Presently they fell asleep for a little while. When Winston woke up, the hands of the clock had crept round to nearly 9. He did not stir, because Julia was sleeping with her head in the crook of his arm. Most of her makeup had transferred itself to his own face or the bolster, but a light stain of rouge still brought out the beauty of her cheekbone. What's with Orwell and his weird obsession with cheekbones? This is not the first time it is mentioned. I believe it has been mentioned several times before. This is starting to be disturbing. A yellow ray from the sinking sun fell across the foot of the bed and lighted up the fireplace. Whoa! The sun is strong during summer, I have to say. Oh, it's a metaphor, never mind. Where the water in the pan was boiling fast. Down in the yard the woman had stopped singing, but the faint shouts of children floated in from the street. He wondered vaguely whether in the abolished past it had been a normal experience to lie in bed like this, in the cool of a summer evening, a man and a woman with no clothes on, making love when they chose, talking of what they chose, not feeling any compulsion to get up, simply lying there and listening to peaceful sounds outside. Oi! Are you going to steal my bloody clothes? No, I wasn't doing that, Mom. Oh, come back here, laddie. I'm going to slap you in the face. Ah, the peaceful sounds of the outside world. Ah, of downtown London. Yes, I believe that. I believe you. Oi, come back here, you lousy prick. Okay. Where was I? There we go. Surely there could never have been a time when that seemed ordinary? Julia woke up, rubbed her eyes and raised herself on her elbow to look at the oil stove. After water's boiled away, she said, I'll get up and make some coffee in another moment. We've got an hour. What time do they cut the lights off at your flats? 23:30. It's 23 at the hostel, but you have to get in earlier than that because... Hi! Get out, you filthy brute! She suddenly twisted herself over in the bed, seized a shoe from the floor and sent it hurtling into the corner with a boyish jerk of her arm, exactly as he had seen her fling the dictionary at Goldstein that morning during the 2 minutes hate. What was it? He said in surprise. A rat. I saw him stick his beastly nose out of the wainscoting. There's a hole down there. I gave him a good fright anyway. Rats! Murmured Winston. In this room! Something about this amuses me. They're all over the place, said Julia indifferently as she lay down again. We've even got them in the kitchen and the hostel. Some parts of London are swarming with them. Did you know they attack children? Yes, they do. In some of these streets, a woman daren't leave a baby alone for 2 minutes. It's the great huge brown ones that do it. And the nasty things is that the brutes always. Don't go on, said Winston, with his eyes slightly shut. Dearest, you've gone quite pale. What's the matter? Do they make you feel sick? Of all horrors in the world, a rat. She pressed herself against him and wound her limbs round him, as though to reassure him with the warmth of her body. He did not reopen his eyes immediately. For several moments he had had the feeling of being back in a nightmare which had recurred from time to time throughout his life. It was always very much the same. He was standing in front of a wall of darkness. A darkness. And on the other side of it there was something unendurable. Something too dreadful to be faced. In the dream, his deepest feeling was always one of self-deception, because he did in fact know that what was behind the wall of darkness. Darkness! More darkness? With a deadly effort, like wrenching a piece out of his own brain, he could even have dragged the thing into the open. He always woke up without discovering what it was. But somehow it was connected with what Julia had been saying when he cut her short. I'm sorry, he said. It's nothing. I don't like rats, that's all. Okay, so the most progressive element in this book is reversing the old stereotype of women being afraid of mice. And now the man is afraid of mice. I have to give credit when credit is due. At least there is one element of this book that isn't outrageously offensive in some way or the other. Oh, don't worry, dear. We're not going to have the filthy brutes in here. I'll protect you. I'll stuff the hole with a bit of sucking before we go, and next time we come here I'll bring some plaster and bang it up properly. Already the black instant of panic was half forgotten. Feeling slightly ashamed of himself, he sat up against the bedhead. Julia got out of bed, pulled on her overalls, and made the coffee. The smell that rose from the saucepan was so powerful and exciting that they shut the window lest anybody outside should notice it and become inquisitive. And we don't want that. What was even better than the taste of the coffee was the silky texture given to it by the sugar, a thing Winston had almost forgotten after years of suckering. With one end in her pocket and a piece of bread and jam in the other, Julia wandered about the room, glancing indifferently at the bookcase, pointing out the best way of repairing the gate-leg table, plumping herself down in the rugged armchair to see if it was comfortable, and examining the absurd 12-hour clock with a sort of tolerant amusement. She brought the glass paperweight over to the bed to have a look at it in a better light. He took it out of her hand, fascinated, as always, by the soft, rain-watery appearance of the glass. "What is it, do you think?" said Julia. "I don't think it's anything. I mean, I don't think it was ever put to any use. That's what I like about it. It's a little chunk of history that they've forgotten to alter. It's a message from 100 years ago, if one knew how to read it." "And that picture over there," she nodded at the engraving on the opposite wall. "Would that be 100 years old? More, 200, I dare say. One can't tell. It's impossible to discover the age of anything nowadays." "I mean, if an old man claims to be 21, who am I to disrepute that? I don't have any evidence of the contrary." Oh boy. She went over to look at it. "Here's where that brute stuck his nose out," she said, kicking the wainscoting immediately below the picture. "What is this place? I've seen it before somewhere." "It's a church, or at least it used to be. St. Clement's Danes, its name was." The fragment of rhyme that Mr. Charrington had taught him came back into his head, and he added half nostalgically, "Oranges and lemons, say the bells of St. Clement's." To his astonishment, she capped the line. "You owe me 3 farthings, say the bells of St. Martin's. When will you pay me, say the bells of Old Bailey? I'm going to bash you in the head, said the bells of St. Trinian's." Only the right people will get this joke. I can't remember how it goes on after that, but anyway, I remember it ends up. "Here comes a candle to light you to bed. Here comes a chopper to chop off your head." Wow, it really is St. Trinian's. It was like the two halves of a countersign. But there must be another line after the bells of Old Bailey. Perhaps it could be dug out of Mr. Charrington's memory if he were suitably prompt. "Who taught you that?" he said. "My grandfather. He used to say it to me when I was a little girl. He was vaporized when I was 8. At any rate, he disappeared." "I wonder what a lemon was," she added inconsequently. This non sequitur kills me. "I've seen oranges. They're kind of a round yellow fruit with a thick skin." "I can remember lemons," said Winston. "They were quite common in the 50s. They were so sour that it set your teeth on edge even to smell them." "I bet that picture's got bugs behind it," said Julia. "I'll take it down and give it a good clean some day. I suppose it's almost time we were living. I must start washing this paint off. What a bore. I'll get the lipstick off your face afterwards." Okay, so once again, I have to give credit where credit is due. After the initial awkwardness? Yes, let's put it like that. Orwell seemed to have finally come around to properly flesh out the relationship, the dynamic between the two protagonists. Now, not only the woman has a proper, well-developed, well-rounded personality, even with the less than amiable portions, now the two people actually have a proper dynamic, as I said. This conversation alone is seemingly unimportant, but it is actually very, very important in underlining what the situation, what the relationship is at this point in time. They're having a casual conversation about elements and things and rhymes that they must have forgotten in time, and then she casually just steps out of the conversation to point out the present problem of here there be rats or other kinds of vermin, which, you know, it does a decent job in emulating a realistic conversation between two people. And again, a realistic conversation between two people isn't always linear and straightforward. It can go all over the place, like this one is doing at the moment. And I can appreciate such small details. It's what they are, what is making this book actually bearable for a change. So there is that. Winston did not get up for a few minutes more. He was frozen with fear. The room was darkening. He turned over towards the light and lay gazing into the glass paperweight. The inexhaustibly interesting thing was not the fragment of coral, but the interior of the glass itself. There was such a depth to it. And yet it was almost as transparent as air. It was as though the surface of the glass had been the arch of the sky, enclosing a tiny world with its atmosphere complete. He had the feeling that he could get inside it, and that in fact he was inside it, along with the mahogany bed, and the gate-leg table, and all the other things in the room, I guess. And the clock and the steel engraving and the paperweight itself. The paperweight was the room he was in, and the coral was Julia's life and his own, fixed in a sort of eternity at the heart of the crystal. Don't you just love it when a novel explains its own metaphors? Isn't that great? No, it's not. So yes, that was chapter 4, a surprisingly short chapter, all things considered. There isn't much happening in terms of a plot, but then again, there isn't really all that much plot happening in general in this book. Like I said, the first half was nothing but world building and the main character's paranoid relationship with the world he inhabits. A really masterful job in setting up, well, the setting itself, as it were. The second half is nothing but this deep dive into the relationship between two people who are not supposed to be in a relationship because society does not approve of relationships in general. So again, it moves some sort of a story very slowly in the background, but for the most part, this is about two people living the best way they could in a fascist dystopia. Or, you know, as George Orwell intended it, a socialist totalitarian dystopia, which is exactly the same thing as fascism. In fact, any ideology can easily turn into fascism as soon as there is somebody who gains too much power and wants to control everyone and everything else. Because that's what fascism does, that's what fascism aims to do. In a nutshell. So even though George Orwell did not actually write this book with the intent of denouncing fascism or totalitarianism in general, this is still pretty much a blueprint for spotting some fundamental signs of fascism and totalitarian mindsets and loss of fundamental freedoms, which is something that we are losing every day we live on this world thanks to certain capitalistic corporations and the politicians who take their money. And with that pleasant image to keep you company during nights, thank you for joining me, everybody. I have resolved to only read one chapter at a time of this book, because otherwise I might just lose my mind. So that will be it for today. And now, before I leave you, how about we read something a bit more light? A light-hearted, wholesome read. Yes, let's do that. Ahem. The violent crimes? All perfectly natural in a society whose advances are limited to its technology. The basic behavior of the modern human is hardly different from that of primitive ancestors. The only noticeable changes are trends, whether in a suit or in a loincloth. People are ignorant, little forms cutting into one another. They seem incapable of advancing beyond the violent tendencies which at one day were necessary for survival. As for projecting the people, well, that's a bit of a paradox, at least from what I know. I'm sure that if you search for some of the victims, you will find out that they were dead when people goes up to the death. Hulk Hogan! Good night, everybody. The Last Unicorn by Peter S. Beagle. Chapter 1. The unicorn lived in a lilac wood, and she lived all alone. She was very old, though she did not know it, as she was no longer the careless color of sea foam, but rather the color of snow falling on a moonlit night. But her eyes were still clear and unwearied, and she still moved like a shadow on the sea. She did not look anything like a horned horse, as unicorns are often pictured, being smaller and cloven-hoofed, and possessing that oldest, wildest grace that horses had never had, that deer had only in a shy, thin imitation and goats in dancing mockery. Her neck was long and slender, making her head seem smaller than it was, and her mane that fell almost to the middle of her back was as soft as a dandelion fluff, and as fine as cirrus. She had pointed ears and thin legs, with feathers of white hair at the ankles, and the long horn above her eyes shone and shivered with its own seashell light even in the deepest midnight. She had killed dragons with it, and healed a king whose poison wound would not close, and knocked down ripe chestnuts for bear cubs. Unicorns are immortal. It is their nature to live alone in one place, usually a forest where there is a pool clear enough for them to see themselves, for they are a little vain, knowing themselves to be the most beautiful creatures in all the world, and magic besides. They mate very rarely, and no place is more enchanted than one where a unicorn has been born. The last time she had seen another unicorn, the young virgins who still came seeking her now and then had called to her in a different tongue. But then she had no idea of months and years and centuries, or even of seasons. It was always spring in her forest, because she lived there, and she wandered all day among the great beech trees, keeping watch over the animals that lived in the ground and under bushes, in nests and caves, earths and treetops. Generation after generation, wolves and rabbits alike, they hunted and loved and had children and died, and as the unicorn did none of these things, she never grew tired of watching them. One day it happened that two men with long bows rode through the forest, hunting for deer. The unicorn followed them, moving so warily that not even the horses knew she was near. The sight of men filled her with an old, slow, strange mixture of tenderness and terror. She never let one see her if she could help it, but she liked to watch them ride by and hear them talking. "I mislike the feel of this forest," the elder of the two hunters grumbled. "Creatures that live in a unicorn's wood learn a little magic of their own in time, mainly concerned with disappearing, will find no game here." "Unicorns are long gone," the second man said. "If indeed they ever were. This is a forest like any other. Then why do the leaves never fall here, or the snow? I tell you, there is one unicorn left in the world. Good luck to the lonely old thing, I say. And as long as it lives in this forest, there won't be a hunter takes so much as a titmouse home at his saddle. Ride on, you'll see. I know their ways, unicorns." "From books," answered the other. "Only from books and tales and songs. Not in the reign of 3 kings has there been even a whisper of a unicorn seen in this country or any other. You know no more about unicorns than I do, for I've read the same books and heard the same stories, and I've never seen one either." The first hunter was silent for a time, and the second whistled sorely to himself. Then the first said, "My great-grandmother saw a unicorn once. She used to tell me about it when I was little." "Oh, indeed? And did she capture it with a golden bridle?" "No, she didn't have one. You don't have to have a golden bridle to catch a unicorn. That's part the fairy tale. You need only to be pure of heart." Yes, the younger man chuckled. "Did she ride her unicorn then? Bareback under the trees like a nymph in the early days of the world?" "My great-grandmother was afraid of large animals," said the first hunter. "She didn't ride it, but she sat very still, and the unicorn put its head in her lap and fell asleep. My great-grandmother never moved till it worked." "What did it look like?" "Pliny describes the unicorn as being very ferocious, similar in the rest of its body to a horse, with the head of a deer, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a bear, a deep bellowing voice, and a single black horn, 2 cubits in length, and the Chinese—" "My great-grandmother said only that the unicorn had a good smell. She never could abide the smell of any beast, even a cat or a cow, let alone a wild thing, but she loved the smell of the unicorn. She began to cry once, telling me about it. Of course, she was a very old woman then, and cried at anything that reminded her of her youth. Let's turn around and hunt somewhere else," the second hunter said abruptly. The unicorn stepped softly into a thicket as they turned their horses, and took up the trail only when they were well ahead of her, once more. The men rode in silence until they were nearing the edge of the forest, when the second hunter asked quietly, "Why did they go away, do you think? If there ever were such things. Who knows? Times change. Would you call this age a good one for unicorns? No, but I wonder if any man before us ever thought his time a good time for unicorns, and it seems to me now that I have heard stories. But I was sleepy with wine, or I was thinking of something else. Well, no matter. There is light enough yet to hunt, if we hurry. Come!" They broke out of the woods, kicked their horses to a gallop, and dashed away. But before they were out of sight, the first hunter looked back over his shoulder and called, just as though he could see the unicorn standing in shadow. "Stay where you are, poor beast. This is no world for you. Stay in your forest and keep your trees green and your friends long-lived. Pay no mind to young girls, for they never become anything more than silly old women. And good luck to you." The unicorn stood still at the edge of the forest and said aloud, "I am the only unicorn there is?" They were the first words she had spoken, even to herself, in more than 100 years. That can be, she thought. She had never minded being alone, never seeing another unicorn, because she had always known that there were others like her in the world, and a unicorn needs no more than that for company. "But I would know if all the others were gone. I'd be gone too. Nothing can happen to them that does not happen to me." Her own voice frightened her and made her want to be running. She moved along the dark paths of her forest, swift and shining, passing through sudden clearings unbearably brilliant with grass or soft with shadow, aware of everything around her, from the weeds that brushed her ankles to instant quick flickers of blue and silver as the wind lifted the leaves. "Oh, I could never live this. I never could, not if I really were the only unicorn in the world. I know how to live here. I know how everything smells and tastes and is. What could I ever search for in the world except this again?" But when she stopped running at last and stood still, listening to crows and a quarrel of squirrels over her head, she wondered, "But suppose they are hiding together, somewhere far away? What if they are hiding and waiting for me?" From that first moment of doubt, there was no peace for her. From the time she first imagined living in a forest, she could not stand in one place without wanting to be somewhere else. She trotted up and down beside her pool, restless and unhappy. Unicorns are not meant to make choices. She said no, and yes, and no again, day and night, and for the first time she began to feel the minutes crawling over her like worms. "I will not go, because men have seen no unicorns for a while does not mean they have all vanished. Even if it were true, I would not go. I live here." But at last she woke up in the middle of one warm night and said, "Yes, but now." She hurried through her forest, trying to look at nothing and smell nothing, trying not to feel her earth under her cloven hoofs. The animals who move in the dark, the owls and the foxes and the deer, raised their heads as she passed by, but she would not look at them. "I must go quickly," she thought, "and come back as soon as I can. Maybe I won't have to go very far, but whether I find the others or not, I will come back very soon as I can." Under the moon, the road that ran from the edge of the forest gleamed like water, but when she stepped out onto it, away from the trees, she felt how hard it was, and how long. She almost turned back then, but instead she took a deep breath of the woods air that still drifted to her, and held it in her mouth like a flower, as long as she could.